Welcome to Rustic Sauna's Woodwork Series. This is the planer bench build. Today's video is going to cover the steps that I took to build this useful, cool, practical, and space-saving folding planer bench, which I was originally inspired to build by Matthew Peach. But I'm kicking it up a whole nother level by using locally harvested and hand-milled spruce, pine, and fir, making this completely custom and unique. This will be the first video in this series, and this bench will be extremely useful in the future for making more projects and helping store more tools, so expect to see it in a lot of future videos. Without further ado, let's dive in. Here we are getting down and dirty, and I'm going to start this project by pulling out my slabs. These are some huge, heavy slabs. Now I'm just seeing what I have to work with here as I drag the tape measure down the board. And now I'm going to chalk my lines. Trying to be as precise as possible here. These cuts are really going to make a difference in the final product as we rip these down to boards. Now measuring from that line to see exactly how wide this board can be. This is the Craig AccuCut, and it is one of my favorite new tools. Super simple to use. Simply line up the track and cut. Really no thinking involved. It's really hard to screw this one up. Now this really isn't how the tool is supposed to be used, but it does work in this fashion. You see me here lining up the track with the line again. And once you're ready, just carefully plunge into the cut and then begin cutting again to finish off the cut. This does come with a little piece that locks onto the end of the wood. I actually took that off to make this cut possible. Now you see here I'm trying to snap off the live edge, but this piece is just a little too thick. So now I'm going to have to cut through the last bit from the other side as you see me chalking my line once again. Obviously I'm just going from cut to cut. And back with the Craig AccuCut. Nice easy pass as we're only cutting through just a couple of millimeters of wood. Again, moving the AccuCut up. Plunging the saw in and finishing the cut. Now we're moving on to the next slab. This one's a little smaller, a little bit easier to work with. Chalking some lines again here. Super simple. Continue to cut just like before. But this one is a little bit looser. Just a little bit easier to snap this edge off. Of course, that's going to leave a little bit of a mess. That's why we come in here with the chisel to finish it up. And no, this is not a chisel injury. This is from the MRSA infection that I got earlier in the season when we were out at Radium. You'll see me here making my cut list, writing everything down, and then adding up exactly how many board feet I'm going to need. 69 feet there, as you see. Now we rip the slabs down to full dimension 2x4 on the table saw. This is why it's really important to make sure those chop lines are as straight as possible. Otherwise, you're going to get some weird things happening on the table saw. It can actually be quite dangerous if you're not ready for it. Working with these giant slabs can definitely be a challenge. They do weigh a lot. They're pretty unwieldy and they're just not that easy to cut straight. But if you take your time, generally you get pretty consistent results. Different angle here for you. Believe this is the next day or later that day. No, I'm wearing different clothes. This has got to be the next day. Looks perfect. And now we move over to the planer to clean up the rough cut faces. This is the whole reason I am building this bench, because the planer weighs like 109 pounds. It's super hard to move around. This bench will just make it easy to be able to roll it around and then set up, and you have a outfeed table. So you know you can just easily get your material to feed out, and if nothing's in the way, of course. This makes things really simple. Another angle here for you. A common problem I've been having with this thing, due to the amount of power it uses and running a vacuum at the same time, is blowing the breaker. Here we are finishing up that cut. The planer makes a huge mess. And I'll tell you what, that vacuum fills up so quickly, it just starts puking wood chips. Thought the vacuum was pretty big, but it's incredible how much mess this thing makes. It's almost more than a chainsaw.
A few inches later.
And this is what we're left with just a few minutes later again. Now we cut to length on the chop saw. Of course, adhering to my cut list. I prefer to measure every cut so no mistakes are made, rather than measuring a bunch of cuts and then having to account for blade width. You see how nice those 2x4s ended up being. Just absolutely gorgeous pieces of wood. Oops. I'll run these small pieces through the planer. Just really get them absolutely perfect. Make sure they're matching. You'll see here we have a perfect match. And they have to be, so this whole thing can fold up and down. Banging. Now we're ready to start assembling the pieces. Here you see me assembling and stacking the L pieces, which are going to make up a big part of the frame. Got a longer bit on there so I can really drive them in and make sure they're secure. Now we'll run those through the planer just so they're absolutely perfect, because again, everything's got to fold, so there can't really be anything sticking out. And those just barely fit through the planer, so that was pretty lucky. Now we're going to measure out the center for the holes on the L brackets. So where the bolts are going to go. If you don't quite understand, don't worry, you will shortly. I'm center punching the holes to make the drilling easier. And now we move over to the drill press. Now we're measuring out the corresponding holes on the frame pieces that are going to match up with those L bracket holes that we just drilled. Of course, these are a little too long to be taken to the drill press, so these holes will be drilled manually. And now we're center boring so the bolts will sit flush. Counter boring, I should say. Now I'm beginning to assemble the frame. So you'll see here, these L brackets, they mount on just like this. Put the bolts through there. You'll notice that the last one sticks out over and past the frame. Now we're going to add washers as bushings and start to bolt everything together. It moves, but I still didn't quite fully understand it yet. But don't worry, it's all going to make sense soon. Now we're cutting the cross member. It's going to really add a lot of strength and hold everything together. The cross member, it's going to hold these two frame pieces together while it mounts to the leg pieces. Just when you're putting this together, make sure it's centered. Once you have it where you want it, you're going to want to go ahead and screw in to the inner L brackets, not to the outer frame. Now here I am making the legs. So what we're doing here is screwing these 2x4s in. We're going to use that as a guide, and we're going to cut a second piece to add more rigidity, strength, and some width to the base. You see here I'm marking my cuts. Back over to the saw. A few chops later, and we have those pieces cut out. Back over here, we fit the leg pieces and screw it all together. This doesn't need to be totally perfect. Now we're securing the cross brace. You'll do this obviously for each leg. There's going to be two of them. Now we're going to link the leg pieces together from the bottom. Clamping everything together, making sure it's nice and positioned well. Put a screw in there and then start checking for square. Screw that together as well. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to flip it over. Now we get to test fit the assembly. You can see here I'm a little confused. I'm like, what's going on? Well, I've actually got this upside down right now. But I got it sorted out here. So you'll see now it's working properly. We're getting close to the end, so time to tighten up all these bolts, but make sure they're not too tight. Now we're going to move on to the tabletop. Using some scraps I have kicking around, marking everything out. And now I'm going to go ahead and make the tabletop cuts, again using the Craig AccuCut. Just as simple as that. And now to mount the tabletop to the frame. Kind of test fitting everything. And of course I am taking measurements in between all this to ensure everything's sitting where it's supposed to be sitting. It's a rough day to be a camera today though, I'll tell you what. Caught it that time, some good reflex. You see taking some measurements there, making sure everything's going to be exactly where it needs to be so this thing will open and close properly. Screwing everything down. A little tricky here because wood tends to warp and not be totally perfect, so I'm just having a fight with it to get it where I want it. And after all that fighting and forcing and reefing, it still wasn't quite right. So these have to be near perfect, and in this case a quick trim is all you need. Finally, time to test the action. Look at that. I think it's a pretty cool shot. Super exciting. Making good use of more scraps here. You can see they're different colors just out of the scrap bin. None of these were from a full sheet for the tabletop, just stuff I had lying around. And if you ask me, it's looking pretty good, pretty promising so far here. The heaviest tool goes on the non-moving platform, second up from the bottom, you can see right there. And that's where the planer is going to go. Pre-drilling here and adding some leg bolts for extra strength. Tried here with the wrench at first, but I'm like, no way, screw this. Pulled out the impact again. Get that done in like 2 seconds flat. Now we're going to flip it and add some casters to the bottom so it can roll around and it'll actually be high enough to fully open or close, I guess, depending on how you look at it, into a shelf. I actually replaced the screws that came with the casters with some longer, I think they were 2-inch, 1.5 inch, 2-inch screws, way better than the like 3/4 inch garbage it came with. You can see here, this is the first real test of it standing up into a shelf. Me admiring my work and testing it out again. Pretty happy with it. Now we're going to add a locking pin so we can keep the shelf upright when we're in storage mode. Drilling out that hole a little more so it slides in nice and easy. Last but not least, it needs some support legs on the extending end. Again, you can see that's not the best piece ever, kind of just a piece of scrap. It could be run through the planer and turned into a nicer piece, but for this case, it really doesn't need to be perfect. It's an outside edge with the live edge on it, and figured might as well use it for something. Again, when you're tightening this stuff down, make sure you got bushings in between everything and don't tighten it down too much, or you're going to have issues when you're lowering and lifting everything. Now test the legs action. And finally, just going to add a string to keep the legs from extending too far. You can see I screwed up there, but hey, ta-da, that's it. One of the coolest tables / shelves / storage ideas I've ever seen. Thank you everyone for watching. Stay tuned for more woodwork projects and don't miss our sauna build series. See exactly how we build our saunas straight from scratch. And check out our web store at Rusticsaunas.ca to pick up some cool woodwork projects of your own. Take care, we'll catch you in the next one.